After many years of marriage, it can be difficult to maintain cordial relations, as much of the time is inevitably consumed by family responsibilities. Yet I always managed to find some form of balance. It was during a recent camping trip with friends, however, that I uncovered a shocking truth about my wife, which compelled me to initiate my own investigation. There are men who remain entirely unaware of certain things. I used to be one of them. These men, who fail to notice the signs, probably need a special gathering, a place where we can come together, share a drink, and confess our ignorance. The only issue is, by the time we realize we belong there, we may have missed our chance to do anything about it. Mary and I got married when we were 20. We spent so much time together, raising 3 children and finding moments of enjoyment between pregnancies. I tried to be the devoted husband, as the books advised. When our daughter Allison went off to college, I wondered how Mary would occupy her time once the children were grown and left home. She decided to volunteer at the local hospital. She devoted 3 days a week to this cause, alternating between shifts at the gift shop, the children's playroom, and other areas. Though our children had moved out, our group of friends stayed close, and we continued to meet for barbecues and house parties. I became particularly close to 3 men in the group, with whom I shared a passion for fishing. We often planned weekend trips together, usually 4 or 5 times a year. I always believed that our marriage was no different from others, the typical life of couples around us. Our children grew up, moved away, and our wives found their own paths. Some worked, some didn't. Meanwhile, we, the husbands, focused on our careers, counting down the days to retirement. During our fishing trips, we talk about all of this, sometimes delving into deeper topics like relationships and intimacy. In May, the 4 of us set out on another fishing trip. We sat in the boat, watching my fishing line disappear under the water's surface. And the conversation started with Jack talking about his recent trip to Stanford to visit his son. He shared how his wife had found an empty contraceptive wrapper in their son's room, which had deeply upset him. In response, Paul told a story about visiting their daughter at college. His wife had shared that their daughter, Kelly, had confessed to an intimate relationship with her boyfriend. We all laughed when Paul described the young man, constantly in worn-out, dirty clothes, perpetually needing a shave, and slouching as if he never stood up straight. Mike, however, remained quiet. Sensing that something was on his mind, I asked, "Mike, what's going on? You look deep in thought." He hesitated before replying. "I'm not sure if I should say anything. If I'm wrong, it could lead to something awkward. If I'm right, it could hurt all of us. Did you see something, or is this just speculation?" I pressed. After a brief pause, his gaze fixed on the water, he finally said, "I saw your wife parking the car behind the Marriott." "Whose wife? And when?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of confusion. "Yours," he answered. "3 weeks ago, and the day before yesterday." Jack, clearly startled, spoke up, "Are you suggesting that Nick's wife is unfaithful?" Mike looked at him, shaking his head. "I can't confirm anything. I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong. All I know is that I've seen her at the Marriott twice in the last month." The words hung in the air as the boat rocked gently on the water, and I was left processing what had just been revealed. I deliver groceries to the Marriott 3 times a week, just like I do for any other hotel in the area. Paul nodded, realizing his mistake. However, as I reflected on the situation, a question lingered in my mind. Why would Mary go to the Marriott twice in a month? Could she be unfaithful to me? I stayed on the fishing trip with the group, not wanting to leave, as that would have meant admitting my suspicions about Mary's loyalty. Back in town, I picked up Jack's car and drove home, only to find that Mary was gone. I sat down at my computer, considering how I might uncover the truth about her whereabouts. Hours passed as I searched for clues online, and I eventually ordered items to aid in my investigation, sending them to my office. When Mary returned, I tried flirting with her, but she waved me off, claiming she had a headache. It was nothing out of the ordinary. For the next week, we went about our lives as usual, but my doubts continued to nag at me. I watched her closely, even calling her at random times, but everything seemed fine. That evening, after receiving the package, I retreated to the garage, secretly installing a GPS tracker on her car to monitor her movements. The next day, I received another package and decided to install it, enabling me to eavesdrop on conversations in Mary's car. The following morning, during breakfast, Mary mentioned that she had no duties at the hospital and would be going shopping. I watched her closely from my office as she left the house, heading to the mall before stopping at the market. She returned home at 1 p.m., groceries in tow. At 1:30, she went outside again, driving south for about 10 minutes, then east for another 10, until she finally arrived at the Marriott. I decided to leave my office and follow her. 5 minutes later, I found her car and parked nearby, remaining unnoticed while keeping a clear view of her vehicle. At 4:20, she left the hotel and walked straight to her car. As she drove out of the parking lot, she noticed Alex White coming out of the same exit. They exchanged a brief nod before she drove past him. I was surprised to see Alex, especially since he was married to one of the most attractive women in our social circle. After he left, she stayed in the parking lot for a few minutes until her phone rang. The voice on the other end sounded distant. "Nick?" Mary asked, clearly puzzled. "Why not just say hello?" "Hello. What would you like for dinner tonight?" "How about something adventurous, like a hot sauce dish?" she continued. "Oops, we're out of sauce. Do you have any other ideas?" I asked, trying to divert the conversation to more neutral ground. "Maybe something fresh and nutritious, like a salad or grilled salmon?" "What time will you be home?" I asked, attempting to keep things casual. "About 5, she replied. "Sounds good. See you later," I said, hanging up the phone. As I sat there, a sudden thought crossed my mind, and I decided to park my car and enter the Marriott. I noticed the daughter of one of my clients at the front desk and made small talk with her for a few minutes before gathering the courage to ask. "I heard that my friend stays here. Could you check if he's here today?" Without hesitation, she asked for his name. "Alex," I replied. "Alex White." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and after a few moments, she answered. He checked into his room as usual. Every Thursday morning, he checks into the same room and stays until the next morning. Sometimes he stays on other days, but Thursdays are always the same. He's a regular. The computer was able to track the pattern all the way back to January. When I asked if there would be any issues printing out his notes, she inquired whether it would remain confidential. I assured her that this would not be a problem. "Do you need a hard copy?" she asked. "Yes, please," I responded. She handed me a Marriott folder. Though I wasn't sure if I would need it immediately, I felt it might come in handy later. I slipped it into my briefcase and headed home. When I arrived, Mary had prepared a salmon salad for us to enjoy together, along with tea. She also shared details of her shopping trip, mentioning that she had stayed at the mall until 3 o'clock and stopped by the market on her way back. However, despite her calm demeanor, I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that something wasn't right. Trying to justify myself, I excused myself and went to the bathroom. Inside, I found a wet shower and clothes in the laundry basket, and a surge of anger flooded me. How could Mary have been seeing Alex for months? It was clear to me now that she was lying. After dinner, while she relaxed on the couch with a book, I sat at the computer. As I browsed through her social circle, I came across the email address of Alex's wife. Using a separate email account, I sent her a straightforward message. "If you want to know who is cheating on you, when, and where, please reply to this email. I have evidence you may be interested in." I had no intention of gaining anything from this. I sent the email at 8:10 p.m., and by 9 o'clock, I had a reply. "I have almost the whole day off tomorrow, and I'll be showing the new house on Oak Street in Claremont. Feel free to come by for lunch or stop by when the house is open to chat." After reading the reply, I deleted both her email and mine. Mary joined me later in bed, while I had already fallen asleep. The next morning, she was already up, preparing for her day at the hospital, while I prepared for work as usual. At noon, I called her to ask if I could take care of dinner that evening. "Are you planning to cook?" "What will it be?" she asked. "Is there a dish you'd like me to make?" I inquired. "Jambalaya," she exclaimed. "Jambalaya it is," I replied. After checking Mary's GPS location at the hospital, I left work and headed to Alex's office. As I drove past, I spotted Alex and 2 other men entering the dining area. I quickly found a parking spot and installed another GPS tracker on Alex's car. Then I went to a nearby sandwich shop for lunch. I ordered a sandwich for myself and a salad for Alex's wife. At around 1 p.m., I parked near the open house sign and walked toward it. When Helen saw me, her face turned pale. She quickly got up, hung a sign on the street saying she would return at 2 o'clock, and led me inside. We sat on the sofa, and tears welled up in her eyes as she seemed on the verge of a breakdown. I felt an overwhelming sense of fear as I hastily searched through my briefcase and handed her the Marriott folder. As she read through the papers, more tears filled her eyes. "I'm so sorry," I said softly. She looked up at me, her face filled with both suffering and vulnerability. "This disgusting man has been cheating on me for months," she whispered. "He's been romantically involved with my wife, Mary, for at least part of that time. I'm really sorry," she said, her voice breaking. She paused, wiping away her tears, and then firmly stated, "He's going to pay for this. This piece of paper doesn't mean anything. We need hard evidence, and we need to be prepared for the consequences." I nodded in agreement, acknowledging my tendency to act impulsively. "You're right. We need a well-thought-out plan." An hour later, Helen removed the lunch sign, and we continued discussing the situation until almost 4 o'clock. Unfortunately, no one came by for the open house, but by the time I left, we had already formulated a plan. That evening, while browsing online, I came across a conference in Las Vegas tailored for professionals in my field, as well as another conference geared toward real estate agents. Excited about the opportunities, I shared the information with Helen, who was also eager to attend both events. Once I confirmed my reservation, I told Mary about the conference, emphasizing the networking opportunities it offered. I invited her to join me, but though she seemed interested, she asked for time to think and promised to give me an answer the next morning. Meanwhile, Helen spoke with Alex, informing him about the conference she planned to attend and inviting him to join her. Unfortunately, he had to decline, citing a busy schedule. The following day, Mary called me at work to express her concerns about going to Vegas for 3 days and 1 night, especially regarding the long drive. She mentioned the possibility of visiting her sister instead. Although I tried to mask my disappointment, we didn't delve much further into the trip. That afternoon, I contacted Henry Hawkins, my business lawyer, to ensure there were no conflicts of interest between Mary and me, both personally and professionally. After confirming that there were none, we discussed the potential consequences of a divorce, and I made sure to document our conversation carefully in a digital file. We also talked about the division of family assets, and I expressed concerns about fairness in the process. He outlined a strategy to protect my interests and organize the collection of evidence regarding their affair. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Helen calling from a payphone. "I booked a room at the Mirage Hotel," she said. "I'm staying at Treasure Island. I need to make sure I've got everything ready. I'm bringing my laptop, a personal phone book, and a phone that can work in Vegas without high fees." That evening, as I was finishing up my packing, Mary came in to check my suitcase. "You forgot your swimming trunks," she remarked. "I'm not planning on swimming," I replied, trying to remain composed. "But a quick swim could refresh you after all those meetings," she suggested. I gathered the necessary items and didn't hear anything else from her on the matter. After packing my things, I placed the suitcase in the car and took care of my evening chores. Before bed, I playfully suggested we have some fun before the trip, but she seemed too tired. "Maybe when you get back," she said with a smile. Before dawn, I set off on my journey. At 7:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was Helen. "Where are you?" she asked. "I'm almost in Pomona," I replied. She reminded me, "Do you remember that Denny's where we used to stop on the way to the fair?" "Yes, it's just a couple miles ahead," I confirmed. "Meet me there. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Sounds good," I said. "I'm getting hungry. Should I order for you?" I suggested. "No, I'll wait." "Go ahead and start," she replied. I drove onto the highway and parked in front of the Denny's restaurant. A few minutes later, Helen walked in, dressed in jeans, a loose Western-style shirt, and boots, which was a surprise compared to what I had expected. She greeted me with a smile and took a seat. The waitress quickly brought her a menu and coffee. As we were placing our orders, I couldn't help but notice how different Helen appeared from the polished, professional woman I was accustomed to seeing at social events. After we finished eating, Helen expressed her disappointment about having to go to Las Vegas alone. I suggested she come with me, and she agreed. She followed me to the nearest parking lot where we checked the price of parking for 3 days. The cost was reasonable, so we decided to park next to each other. I helped her transfer her things into my car, and since neither of us needed to travel alone, we set off together. For the next 3.5 hours, we discussed our plans. I drove while she took notes. We stopped in Baker to refuel and take a break. Our bond had grown because we had both endured infidelity in our marriages, and now a friendship had blossomed between us. Despite not really knowing each other before, I felt a strong connection to her. Throughout our journey, we shared moments of laughter, sadness, and a deep sense of camaraderie. After dropping her off at a hotel in Las Vegas, I made plans to meet her for dinner later. While in my room, I called my lawyer, who, with a laugh, informed me that it was possible to come back. He mentioned that my wife had gone to her lover's house, and they had been caught on video engaging in compromising activities in the backyard pool. Even the current issue of Time magazine had been left on the table next to them. Maybe I should ask his wife to contact you, he mused. I wonder if she's already been contacted, I replied. If you both hire me, I can save you a significant amount of money. Thank you, he said. May I ask you a hypothetical question? Of course. What happens to the case if Helen and I decide to be together during our stay in Vegas? Well, he began, unless your wife or Alex is monitoring your whereabouts, nothing will change. You'll be fine as long as you both block their numbers. I want her to submit the documents before we return, I said. But I want to be there when the locks are changed. I'll prepare everything for you, he assured me. And we'll make sure to get a restraining order to keep her away from your business and home, if possible. I thought for a moment. I'll talk to Helen and let you know. An hour later, I arrived at Caesar's, the restaurant Helen had chosen. We sat at the table, enjoyed our meal, and talked. Using my phone, I contacted our lawyer and instructed him to refrain from taking any action until our return. In the meantime, I had asked my assistant to gather additional evidence while we were away. It's better to have too much evidence than not enough, I said to Helen as we continued our conversation. After the meal, we paid the bill and walked around the shopping district, maintaining a respectful distance, though I felt a strong urge to make physical contact. The thought of Mary possibly cheating on me while I was away lingered in my mind. When we reached the taxi rank, Helen returned to her hotel. As she was about to get into a taxi, I could sense that she wanted to kiss me, and I felt the same, but we both held back. Half an hour later, when I returned to my room, the phone rang. It was Mary. It's getting late. Where have you been? She asked. I had dinner at Caesar's and then went for a walk, I replied. I saw a beautiful outfit that I think you'd like. Should I buy it for you? Open clothes? She questioned. You know I don't often dress provocatively. I can't believe I'm almost 50, she added with a hint of disbelief. So, is that a rejection? I asked. Yes, she said. But if you come across a beautiful necklace or another piece of jewelry, I'd be grateful. Okay, I'll take a look tomorrow, I replied. In the meantime, I'll turn off my phone and get some rest. Good night, Mary. I adore you. Sweet dreams. Good night. She never said she loved me. After finishing my nightly routine and getting into bed, ready to turn off my phone, I heard a knock at the door. Hi, I said, opening the door and letting Helen in, then closing it tightly behind her. I stood there in a towel, and she remained in her jeans and Western-style shirt. Alex is at home and didn't even answer my calls because he's in bed with your wife, she said, her voice heavy with frustration. I couldn't stop thinking about it during the taxi ride to the hotel. I returned to my room, instructed the receptionist not to disturb me for the night, quickly made the bed, and headed straight to the door. She greeted me with a smile and a hug. I couldn't help but ask, "Are you here to take revenge?" At first, I wanted to be with you to avenge the betrayal we both went through, she admitted, her voice soft but firm. But now I don't have that motivation anymore. Alex ruined our marriage. I could have wallowed in sadness for years, pretending to be a victim, drowning in self-pity while melancholic songs played on the radio. But instead of sinking into despair, I chose to change my life and accept it the way I wanted to be. Her words were filled with resolve, and I could feel the weight of everything she had been through. I long for you to be next to me in bed, she continued, but I didn't want us to have intimacy. I wanted your companionship and your love, but I wasn't ready for anything more yet. I gently put my arm around her shoulders, my voice soft as I asked, "What do you like?" "I like being loved and taken care of," she replied quietly. "I'll give it my all," I promised her. I went into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and we took turns showering, exchanging soft kisses before heading to bed. "Helen, I want us to lie down, hug, and fall asleep with our arms around each other," I said. She gently took my face in her hands, and a tear rolled down her cheek. We kissed softly before she climbed into bed, and I made room beside her. She settled in, albeit uncomfortably, and wrapped her arms around me. I kissed her gently on the lips, and we fell asleep. When I woke up, I was surprised by another kiss from her, which led to a more intimate moment between us. She took the initiative, and I found myself unable to resist. After a passionate meeting, we both felt the weight of exhaustion and decided to get some more rest. When we finally woke up, it was almost noon. After taking a shower and getting dressed, we made our way to Helen's room, where she needed to change into fresh clothes. While she was changing, I called our lawyer. He informed me that Alex and Mary had spent the night together in our marital bed. Additionally, the photographer had captured photos of various rooms in our house, including the backyard, bedroom, living room, and my computer desk. Grateful for the information, I thanked the lawyer and ended the call. Afterward, Helen and I got into my car and we drove to Lake Mead. During the drive, we talked, our conversation filled with a range of emotions, from anger to sadness. As the hours passed, the pain did not subside. By the time we reached Kingman, Arizona, my heart felt heavy with sorrow. Our conversation revealed how much Mary and I had lost, the love and connection we once shared. Though we both still cared deeply for our children, the romantic love between us had long faded. Helen also realized that her relationship with Alex had reached a breaking point. We stopped in Kingman for dinner before heading back to Las Vegas, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The time passed quickly as we discussed our lives, plans for the future, and the uncertain road ahead, including our hopes for the next few years and what would happen to our children after the divorce. Back at the hotel, I packed my belongings, loaded my suitcase into the car, checked out, and moved into Helen's room. As we lay in bed together, she began to cry. Despite my attempts to stay strong, like my hero John Wayne, I felt my own emotions rising, and I found myself on the verge of tears. Unlike my previous experiences with Mary, where our time together was focused on quick pleasure, lying next to Helen brought me a sense of pure joy, simply from having her there with me. These feelings were new, unlike anything I had ever felt before. The next morning, we shared another intimate moment, then decided to take a nap. When we woke up, we ordered food and drinks to the room and began preparing to leave. As we exchanged loving glances and kisses, we made our way to the parking lot where Helen's car was parked. She looked at me and asked, "What now?" I too had been thinking about what our next steps would be. "I don't want to share a bed with Alex," she said, looking at me with confusion in her eyes. "I want to be with you," she continued. "You said you wanted me to be with you, not Alex. Alex and Mary have been doing this for a long time, so why can't we?" "Let's do it," I replied. "Really?" she asked. "Yes, really," I confirmed. "This way, we'll no longer feel angry, abandoned, or hurt. They can fulfill their desires, and we'll win." Did we win? "The real victory," I added, "is waking up with you every morning and living beside you." "But what if Alex is just playing games with Mary and doesn't really want to be with her?" she asked. "In that case," I said, "they'll get what they deserve. By giving up honesty, they're missing out on two wonderful people, their homes, and their families. It would be better for everyone if there was more transparency." Helen paused for a moment. "I need time to think about everything," she said. "Let's meet in my office to discuss everything in more detail." "Do you have enough time to think?" I asked, making sure she was comfortable. She looked at me, her expression thoughtful. "Let me clarify," she said. "You're suggesting that we live together? You're suggesting that all four of us get divorced?" I nodded. "Yes, Helen, the four of us are really getting divorced. As soon as it's finalized, I'd like to marry you the very next day. Will you marry me?" I could sense the weight of the question, but I felt no hesitation in my heart. "It may seem too early," I continued, "because we've only just met but in truth, we've known each other for years. It's only been a few days since we didn't even think about the possibility of love. Right now, I am completely dedicated to loving you. My feelings for you are sincere. Helen, I said, my voice soft, please think about it when you go to my office. Drive carefully. I leaned over and kissed her as she got into the car. That kiss was filled with the promise of love that I was ready to give. She placed a towel on the seat and drove off. As she left, I wondered whether she would visit my office, accept my offer, and what would happen to me tonight. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw that Helen was already waiting by her car. As soon as I parked, she hurried to open the door, squeezing into the tight space between me and the steering wheel. I love you, she said eagerly. I want to wake up with you every morning. I'll marry you. She paused for a moment, showering me with kisses, and then asked, what are we going to do next? We need to talk to our spouses, I replied. Let me check the GPS to see where they are. Both beacons indicated that they were at Helen's house. Sit down, we're going to your place, I said. 10 minutes later, we arrived at the house and parked behind her car in the driveway. We quietly entered through the back door, our footsteps barely making a sound. As we moved through the house, we heard indistinct noises coming from the living room. We found them there, lying on the floor. Mary had betrayed me in that very room. They ignored our presence, continuing their actions as if we weren't even there. I motioned for Helen to sit on the sofa, and I took a seat next to her. Helen avoided making eye contact with me. The atmosphere in the room was thick with a mix of words and actions that were anything but pleasant. After a while, their behavior ceased, and it was then that Alex noticed our presence. "Oh no," he exclaimed, his voice full of surprise. Mary froze when she saw us. Helen was the first to break the silence. "You ruined my carpet," she said coldly. Mary hurriedly scrambled to gather her clothes, and Alex remained seated on the floor, his eyes fixed on us. I suggested, "Maybe you need time to get dressed and freshen up." "Oh my God, Nick," Mary said, her voice trembling with guilt. "I feel terrible about all of this. We didn't plan for this to happen," she added, tears filling her eyes. "Let's talk once you've freshened up and changed," I responded calmly. As they stood up and left the room, I gathered their scattered clothes and made my way to the bathroom. Meanwhile, Helen was already attempting to clean the stain on the carpet. "The next steps depend on you," I informed her as I entered. "Which house should we live in? Do you want to stay here or come to my place?" "Why should I be the one to choose?" she replied. "It's their fault they betrayed us. We have to make a decision," I said. At that moment, Alex and Mary returned to the room. I motioned for them to sit on the other sofa, where they took seats at opposite ends, keeping their distance. Helen finally relented and joined us, sitting beside me on the couch. Alex began to speak, but Helen raised her hand to silence him. Then, she turned to look at him and asked, "Alex, do you really love this woman, or is it just physical attraction?" There was a long pause before Alex looked down, meeting Mary's gaze. With a sigh, he finally admitted, "I think I love her." Turning to Mary, I asked, "And you? Do you love Alex?" Mary responded almost immediately, "If things were different, would you consider moving in together?" Alex hesitated before saying, "I don't want our marriage to end." "So, you're asking for permission to continue seeing my wife?" I asked, my tone sharp. "Do you think Helen should deal with the consequences of your actions on her own?" "I didn't want you to find out," Alex said softly. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt." Helen, her voice cold, asked, "Would you mind if I had an extramarital affair?" Alex's eyes widened in shock. "No, you're my wife," he protested. I pressed on. "How would you feel if I had an affair with Helen right here on the carpet in your living room?" Alex was stunned. "No, it shouldn't be like that," he stammered. Then, in disbelief, he asked, "Wait, are you two involved?" "No," I clarified, "I've never been involved with Helen. But I thought it would be fair to play out this scenario with both of you watching, so you could truly understand the emotional damage of betrayal." Mary, wiping her eyes with a napkin, apologized to me, expressing regret for offending me. Alex, however, accused Mary of planning the affair deliberately, mentioning how she had frequently visited the Marriott for their secret meetings, which only deepened my pain. Helen, not missing a beat, turned to Alex and told him to pack his suitcase in 5 minutes and be gone in 6. She told him to contact her lawyer and arrange the return of his remaining belongings. Alex stood there, frozen, while Helen glanced at her watch. Then, she turned to Mary and warned her that she would be heading to our house soon. Mary had 5 minutes to gather her things and leave. Once we arrived at the house, Helen reminded them both that they needed to contact her lawyer for further arrangements. She threatened that if either of them returned without going through a lawyer, she would distribute incriminating photos to everyone, including their children. Helen then turned to Alex, her voice stern, reminding him that they had just 4 minutes. In a hurry, Alex rushed toward the bedroom. Helen began her countdown, and when she reached 1 minute, I moved toward the bedroom door. "You'd better leave before time runs out," I said firmly. Alex quickly packed his belongings and left without uttering a word to either Helen or Mary. "Mary, it's time for you to go," I said. "Helen, don't forget to lock the door after we leave. If Alex comes back, call me," I instructed. I told him the photos would be online before he even had a chance to find them. I added, "Be careful. We can't predict what Alex might do," Helen warned. I followed Mary out of the house, and she trailed behind my car as we drove to our place. I cracked open the door and greeted her as she arrived. Tears streamed down her face as she entered, and once inside, she collapsed into a chair in the kitchen, shaking with sobs. "I'm really sorry, Nick," she said between tears. "Good. That's how it should be," I replied. "In January, you began a relationship with Alex, and our intimacy ended. Did I miss something? Have you been unhappy with me?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's just that with Alex, I felt important. I believe you can do it without me," I said, staring at her. "The children don't seem to depend on me. You seem to have everything under control. Alex made me feel important," she continued. "He didn't even say goodbye when he left. He's not filing for divorce, which means he doesn't want to be with you." I looked at her, my gaze steady. "You were just a convenient choice for him. Do you understand your role in all this?" She met my gaze, searching for answers. Mary was a woman known for her carefree attitude and free morals, and perhaps she could be content being alone. But I could only hope that everything she had done had been worth the consequences. This could very well be the end of her marriage, her home, and any future she might have with me, and possibly even the relationship she had with her children. Tears continued to pour from her eyes as she sat there, broken. I opened a Diet Coke from the fridge and sat down across from her. When her sobs finally subsided, I glanced at my watch and reminded her, "You got the 5 minutes we agreed on." Once the timer on the oven was set, I noticed that according to the plan, she wouldn't be there a moment longer. The door clicked shut behind her. I watched her pack 2 suitcases into the car, and then she drove away, with Alex following in his car. Back in my office, I turned on the surveillance screen and saw that they had both parked nearby. As I started recording, I heard the car door open, followed by the sound of Alex getting in. Mary's sobs echoed in the car. "They won't actually divorce us," Alex said, trying to reassure her. But deep down, Mary knew the truth. "I'm going to get a divorce, and I'll never take you back," she sobbed. "I used to be a good wife," she lamented, "and now I'm just nobody." Her voice was filled with pain and anger as she accused Alex. "What have you done to me? What are you going to do now?" she demanded, feeling abandoned and betrayed. "You don't care what happens to us. We got caught, and now you're leaving me," she accused him, calling him a jerk. "If I could, I'd send these photos to your children, not mine," she threatened, her voice filled with bitterness and resentment. "I can't bring myself to do this. I can't bear the thought of my children seeing me with you, with the one who ruined my marriage," she cried, her voice breaking. A moment later, I heard the sound of the car door opening and closing, followed by the faint hum of the engine starting. The car slowly drove away. I turned off the sound, feeling a surge of anger and bitterness overwhelm me. Despite the rush of emotions inside me, I couldn't bear to watch Mary suffer like that. I looked at the empty tissue box in front of me. While I was rummaging around in the garage, I stumbled upon a set of locks I had bought years ago, but never installed. After a while, I managed to install them, and now, Mary's keys no longer worked in my house. I called Helen immediately and asked, "How are you?" Her voice was tinged with sadness as she confirmed she would be back soon. She told me that Alex had come to the house, asking to speak with her, insisting on being let in. I quickly left the house, knowing the drive would only take about 10 minutes. I told Helen to call me on my cell if Alex showed up before I got there. Alex, it seemed, was even more disgusting than I had imagined. He had abandoned Mary, used her for his pleasure, and had no qualms about betraying me. I cursed him for his heartlessness and swore that I would never let him back into my life. "Hang on, I'll be there soon," I said before hanging up. "I love you," I added, but the call ended abruptly, leaving my heart heavy. As I drove, I made sure to obey the speed limits. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Alex's car parked at the curb. He was standing on the porch, deep in conversation. As soon as I closed the car door, he stopped and turned to face me. "Let me talk to Helen," he said, taking a step forward. "No, she was your wife," I replied firmly. "I warned you not to come back, but here you are. Remember what I promised. Don't make me do this." "I just want to talk to her," he insisted. "It's too late," I shot back. "I've seen you, and I've already sent out the photos. I've got more than 100 of them. I even sent some to your children," I said coldly. "I've sent letters to your friends and to the newspaper, each with your face in it. Talking to Helen won't save your marriage. You'll get the divorce papers on Monday. Congratulations. You wanted to have fun, but now you've got more than you bargained for." Alex, seemingly oblivious to the police car parked nearby, aggressively approached me. I stood my ground, watching him come closer. He landed a powerful blow to my chest, sending me to the ground. Just as he was about to strike again, 2 police officers rushed in and detained him. "I'll find you," he yelled as they handcuffed him and shoved him into the back of the police car. Helen arrived soon after, and we exchanged a few words with the officers while Alex continued shouting threats from the car. Once the police left, we returned to the building. "Did you really send those photos?" she asked quietly. "No, it would only hurt Alex," I answered. "My children are coming next weekend for their mother's birthday, and if they're curious about the photos, I won't dare show them. I hope they won't ask to see them." Witnessing Alex's inappropriate behavior with Mary had been too much for me. I didn't want our children to know what had happened. Part of me, though, wanted to understand the situation better. "Why didn't you do it?" Helen asked. He painted a dark picture of my future, one filled with loneliness and desperate need for him. Despite his words, I could feel a noticeable lack of love for me, our children, and our family. There was a part of me that didn't want to open the door, still holding on to the hope that somehow Alex and I could fix everything. But as I stood there, I made a decision. I didn't open the door when I saw his car parked on the street. I realized I no longer needed him to feel complete. In the past 4 days, I had come to understand that being alone wasn't the issue. I didn't need his presence anymore. There was a man who adored me and was always eager to show his love. This man had been taking care of my children for quite some time now. He was their football coach, not Alex. He had gone camping with us. He had fixed a leaky water heater. He had been there in all the ways that truly mattered. Standing in the doorway, I could see that Alex was upset, and I made the decision to call the police. I spoke to them, detailing the situation and expressing my concern over his violent tendencies. I could hear the police car pull up to the house. "I was worried he might hurt you," and he did. "His blow had caused you significant pain." For a brief moment, I thought that maybe a kiss could ease the pain, a small comfort in the midst of everything. It seemed like a good idea. Maybe we should go to the bedroom and calm down a little. I embraced her, and she returned the hug as we walked toward the bedroom. To my surprise, the room was empty. The bed was unmade, and there wasn't a single carpet on the floor. Despite the lack of decoration, we spent the night together in bed, holding each other, kissing, and simply being in each other's presence until the first light of dawn. As the room began to fill with sunlight, both Helen's phone and mine rang. Helen answered hers without leaving the bed, and I hurried into the hallway to take mine. It was Todd calling. "Dad, what's going on?" he asked, his voice full of confusion. I replied, "What do you mean?" Todd explained that he had called his mother this morning to discuss their visit for the weekend, but she had burst into tears and asked him to call me. After hanging up, she refused to answer any further calls. "When will the 3 of you be able to come home? If needed, we can come to you tonight," he asked. What's going on? I can't talk about it on the phone. Call me back and let me know your travel plans. If you're flying, I'll meet you at the airport. If you're driving, let me know when you'll be back. You won't tell me about it over the phone? He asked, sounding puzzled. No, I replied, my tone firm. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting, but this is the best way. After the call, I glanced back into the bedroom. Helen, who was still on the phone, looked pale and motionless. The moment she saw me, she gestured for me to come over. She interrupted her conversation and hung up, whispering, "This is Carol. Her father called from prison last night." She continued, asking for help with his bail. She wants to know what happened. Please find out when they can come back. We need to have a family meeting urgently. My kids are coming back tonight. Let's meet at my place and share the news together. Alex was still in custody, and Mary's whereabouts remained unknown. Helen told Carol to go home and bring her brother with her, so they could get in touch when they were near. They were supposed to come to my house for the meeting. Carol asked Helen numerous questions, but Helen promised to give her the answers only when they were together. I contacted our lawyer to arrange the delivery of the photos and informed him about the attack and our plans for the future. He approved the plan and promised to personally deliver the photos. I prepared by buying packing boxes and started packing Alex's things, placing them in the garage. Helen found a spare key to his car, and we put that in the garage as well. Before heading to my house, we had all of Helen's calls forwarded to my phone. Once inside the house, I began gathering my belongings, and Helen occasionally looked around, asking me for guidance. When the phone rang, I glanced at the caller ID and handed it to her. It was Carol, telling us she would be there in about an hour. Helen thanked her and ended the call. Shortly after, my children called, letting me know they would also be arriving in an hour. Helen offered to order pizza and salad, arranging for delivery. As I continued collecting my things, I felt the urge to keep myself busy. When I stepped out of the bedroom, I found Helen standing by the window. I walked over to her and gave her a hug, knowing that emotions would be running high. The tears and anger weren't directed at us, but rather at the disappointment, the resentment, and the feeling of being betrayed. I reminded myself that we had done nothing wrong and held on to the love we shared. I knew I couldn't get through this without her. "We can do this, and you can do it," she said, bending down to kiss me. Just then, my son's car pulled into the driveway, just as the pizza delivery arrived. "I'll set the table," Helen exclaimed, rushing into the kitchen. When I opened the door to greet Todd, he was helping Helen bring in the food and quickly paid the delivery driver. Looking around, he took in the scene and noticed Helen, but his mother was nowhere to be found. "Where's Mom?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied. Soon after, Helen's children arrived, and I greeted them warmly. They started asking questions, but I raised my hand to signal that we needed to wait. "The food can wait," I said. "Let's all gather in the living room, and I'll explain everything." Helen's children sat on one couch, and mine on the other. I motioned for Helen to sit in a large armchair, while I pulled a chair from the kitchen and prepared to explain. Just as I was about to sit down, there was a knock at the door. It was my lawyer, Henry Hawkins, who handed me a large envelope and wished me luck. He noticed the children in the room and asked if I needed him to stay. I declined, thanked him, and closed the door behind him. I sat down, the envelope heavy in my hands, and decided it was time to share the story before answering any individual questions. The room went silent as I began. "I was fishing with some friends a week ago," I started. "One of my friends mentioned seeing Mary at the Marriott Hotel in the afternoon. Curious, I decided to follow her car using a GPS tracker. A few days later, Mary returned to the Marriott. I paused, letting everyone absorb the information. Shortly after she left, Alex White, Helen's husband, appeared from the same door. I put the pieces together and managed to get Alex's hotel records, which showed that he had been renting the same room periodically since January. The children exchanged glances, and Alex's son spoke up. Just because they rented the same room doesn't necessarily mean they were unfaithful. Everyone nodded in agreement. "You're right," one of them added. I decided to hire someone to investigate further, hoping there was no affair. I also reached out to Helen to see if she knew anything about why Alex had been at the Marriott. I continued. Our lawyer suggested that we leave town for a few days to get a clearer understanding of what was really happening. Helen said she was going to the Mirage in Las Vegas, and I went to Treasure Island. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone absorbed the information. The story was just beginning to unfold, but already it was clear that this situation was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The following day, when I spoke with the lawyer, he informed me that he had photos of Alex with Mary. The photos in the envelope? Carol asked, gesturing toward the envelope on the floor. Yes, I replied. Helen and I had decided to delay our return for another day. The situation was too disturbing to address immediately. When we finally returned, we found them at Helen's house. We caught them red-handed. We suggested they get divorced if they wanted to be together, and while Alex refused, Mary agreed. After allowing them to pack their belongings, we escorted them out. I haven't had any further contact with Mary since then. Helen reached out to me after Alex returned and threatened her from the porch. She contacted the authorities, and when Alex attacked me and threatened both of us, he was arrested. As far as I know, he is still in custody, and the interrogation has begun. Do you want to get a divorce? The question was asked, and we both confirmed our decision. Have you seen the photos? I asked. We saw them cheating on us in your mother's living room. You shouldn't look at the photos, I added. They're necessary for legal purposes if needed. Father's going to jail, I continued. He attacked me and threatened your mother in front of 2 policemen. I think he will serve his time for this, I added. Mom, when did you find out that Dad was unfaithful? Carol asked. I found out when Nick showed me the hotel records. He used our retirement money to book a room at the Marriott Hotel, I replied. Wow, Carol exclaimed. The others nodded in agreement. And what happens next? One of them asked. There will be changes, Helen replied. I've decided to sell the house. It's too big for me now. Mom, I don't want to move, her daughter interrupted. I'm thinking of getting a roommate. The conversation took a turn when Carol asked, Mom, are you and Nick together? Helen answered, we spent a lot of time in Las Vegas, but when we got back home, we decided to continue the relationship. Before we found out about our spouse's infidelity, Nick and I had never kissed. But now, I have the honor of calling Nick my lover and future husband. We hope you can accept the new reality we're facing. We love each of you, she added. A heavy silence filled the room. After a while, Carol stood up and walked over to me. She knelt down hesitantly, picking up the envelope. I don't want to see these photos, but I feel like I have to, she whispered. I refuse to believe this story, but if the photos confirm its truth, I will have no choice, she said. With trembling hands, she slowly opened the envelope and glanced at a single photo. Quickly, she closed the envelope again and exclaimed, "What a scoundrel." She handed the envelope to me, adding, "You have to let him know what you think of him." I was tempted to do so, but before I could act, Helen's son approached and took the envelope from my hands. He spoke briefly, then reached inside to remove about 10 photos. Calmly, he examined each one before returning them to the envelope. Afterward, we finished off the remaining pizza and salad. At 9 o'clock, we headed out to a Chinese restaurant for dinner. Despite the tension, the children, lifelong friends, had come to terms with the fact that they were now part of a blended family. While we waited for the fortune cookies, my son Matt asked, "Maybe we'll plan a hike this summer." Helen smiled and replied, "Some of my happiest memories from when you were little were the hikes we did together." I fell silent for a moment when Carol, Helen's daughter, looked at me and asked, "May I, Dad?" "May I?" Tears welled up to my eyes. How could she have fallen in love with me so quickly? How could I possibly refuse? Everyone supported her words. "May I, Dad? May I?" "Of course," I replied. "It sounds amazing. Let's coordinate our schedules and pick a date." When we left the restaurant, the plan for our first family camping trip was finally approved. Despite the lingering resentment and disappointment, we looked toward the future with hope. For years have passed since that day. Mary has not appeared in court and has been missing ever since the day after her conversation with the children on the phone. She withdrew money from her credit card and disappeared without a trace. As for Alex, he is currently serving a prison sentence, which could range from 2.5 to 5 years. The children still have not visited him. The envelope remains with me, securely stored in our home safe. Each year, we continue our family tradition of hiking together, forging new memories and strengthening our bonds. Alex had the chance to keep his house, his job, and Helen. I often wonder if he ever thinks about what he lost.